Election Night is a short documentary by Ryan Scarfuro about the United States election of 2016. It is set in a pub in London, and on the night of the election, and locals, including many visitors or people who have immigrated from America, go to watch the results on who will be the 45th President of the United States. There are many people who supported both Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, and we hear from many patrons whose point of view we hear from throughout the documentary. So, according to Bill Nichols, the observational documentary mode is a detached and unobstructed view of footage. It's a kind of fly on the wall approach to filmmaking. It contains often continuous images of an event. The observatory mode also overlaps with direct cinema and cinema verite. So, direct cinema is portraying the truth and reality of cinema, and the literal meaning of cinema verite is truthful cinema. So, this in the current film and documentary climate, these three modes have kind of become interchangeable in a way. So a filmmaker just aspires to a level of invisibility in this mode as the crisis and tension rise. And this is from Barthou. He stated this in his attempts at performing the observatory mode. So, election night is primarily of the observatory mode for a variety of reasons. It has features critical to this mode, such as the non-intervention of Scafuro. It has synced sound recording, as well as a handheld camera throughout the film. It shows the event of the election unfolding in real time as it happened. Election night has been hailed by critics for not showing bias. And it has also been said that it's actually one of the only documentaries about this election to do so. However, it can be argued that despite the observatory nature, which aims for objectivity over subjectivity, it's actually not without bias, and this will be discussed in a moment. So it's important to realize, although election night is primarily the observatory mode, it does Scafuro has actually incorporated a few other elements from different modes. So the poetic and observational mode are often tied close together. However, the poetic documentary mode is often arranged by a composition of images. It's not so continuous, and it's up to the filmmaker to create patterns and meaning throughout different images in this mode. Despite this, the people involved in election night as participants seem more like objects, or what you would consider raw material, rather than complex characters. No one is identified by name. So the only thing that identified at all is identified at all in this documentary is the pub itself, which is the setting. So, as a fly on the wall, people wouldn't necessarily be identified in the observational mode either, but it also does satisfy an element of the poetic mode. So, it could be considered poetic, it can still be considered part of observational mode, but it normally an observational mode would follow a group of characters journey as a fly on the wall, and why they might not be identified necessarily. They would become characters in a way and develop some complexity throughout a journey, and that's not quite the case with election night. A lot of the time they're just people stating their views, or that they think Hillary or Trump should win. So, election night also departs from the traditional observatory mode at the end of the documentary where there's a voiceover. So, it can be assumed that this is from a radio announcer or a television presenter calling the election for Donald Trump to be the 45th President of the United States. This voiceover conforms to the expository mode of documentary. Bill Nichols noted that that observational films, in their purest form, do not conform to voiceover commentary. Instead, they are supposed to portray a more real human interactions and have a spontaneous edge, which election night does. However, it can be drawn that Scafura actually used a voiceover to create meaning and resonate with the audience and really drive home the point that this was a really monumental and historic night. So this is more from the expository mode. It's a feature of that. So it also does speak to some of the bias that I did mention before. While the camera sees a group of people at the pub, it's only quite a small sample of the 350 that had a ticket that night, and it only shows a few Trump supporters and more Hillary supporters. And as the tensions grow, it's not only natural what we see in the film, the tensions are subtly enhanced by Scafura. He's included a musical score that starts at the turning point just before the fight breaks out. So we start to see a turning point where it looks like Trump is starting to gain momentum in the seats he's winning, and a fight breaks out, and then it becomes apparent quite quickly that Trump will win Florida, and then they call the election in his favor, and there's a score undertone to all of this that kind of, again, makes the viewer and the audience feel quite saddened that Hillary isn't winning, and it makes us feel empathy with all of those there that are heartbroken from Brexit and now Trump winning the election, or just the fact that Trump has won. So on the next slide, we're talking about Ryan Scafura and his style that he brings to the documentary. So Ryan Scafura is the writer, director, editor, and a co-producer of Election Night. He primarily identifies as a director of photography, as well as a cinematographer and all-around filmmaker. His past works include working on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and that led into working on Full Frontal with Samantha Bee. On Jon Stewart, Scafura shot one of their viral pieces called Indecision Election, and a lot of other political convention coverage. He's also created a feature-length documentary called Bending Steel, which had a world premiere at Tribeca Film Festival and is about overcoming the limitations of the body and mind. So Ryan Scafura has done many forms of screen content through TV, commercials, films, documentaries, television, comedy, that sort of thing. And his varied work experience has contributed to a unique style of visual storytelling where empathy, art, and humor all work together. Now, this is pretty evident within Election Night because there is some humor. People are making jokes before, tensions get too high. He creates a sense of empathy, as mentioned before, with the score. Once it becomes apparent that Trump wins, the audience feels quite empathetic towards those patrons that are heartbroken. And Scafura is no stranger to politics due to his work on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. So he lives in both London and New York, which is interesting because he's able to blend American politics with the election and in the setting of a pub in London. So there's also the other layer of conflict that's present as Britain has recently been through Brexit, and that becomes apparent throughout the documentary, particularly at the end where people start going, first Brexit and now this.